Hello, my friends. Before we dive in, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments so we can see how far these stories travel. And don't forget to subscribe with notifications on, so YouTube keeps bringing you more chilling stories like these. The clock on the dash read 2 a.m. US Route 6 was less a highway and more a black, endless ribbon of asphalt stretched taut across the high desert. I was running on 4 hours of coffee and pure desperation. If I missed the delivery window in Salt Lake City, my small trucking business, the one I'd poured 10 years of my life into, was done. Finished. The big Kenworth groaned like an old man as I pushed 65. I knew this stretch. It's infamous. Old-timers call it the boneyard because of how many folks have vanished or ended up in the ditch over the decades. I normally wouldn't even breathe hard here, but tonight, the deadline made me careless. That's why I almost didn't see her. She was just a shape at first, then a pale slash against the black backdrop of the canyon wall. A woman, mid-20s maybe, standing right on the white line flagging me down. I hammered the air brakes, the rig shuddering violently, throwing my coffee into the footwell. "You idiot, Ben," I muttered to myself, already regretting stopping. Rule number 1 of the boneyard: never stop. I cranked the window down. The air that rushed in was instantly cold, carrying the sharp, metallic tang of ozone and dust. "You all right, ma'am?" I kept my hand near the door lock. She stepped closer, clutching her left arm, and her face was illuminated by the amber side marker lights of my trailer. She was dressed too well. A nice tweed jacket, expensive jeans, not gear for walking miles of dirt shoulder. Her face was pale, maybe shaken, but her eyes, they were too calm. "My car," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "It broke down miles back. I've been walking for hours. Please, I just need to get to the next town with a signal." I hesitated. There's no town for 70 miles. "Anywhere is better than here," she insisted, giving me a look that was part pleading, part challenge. The pity was a mistake. I leaned across and flipped the handle. The passenger door opened with a heavy thunk. "All right, get in. Name's Ben." "Sarah," she replied, slipping onto the worn bench seat. She didn't have any luggage. No purse, no backpack, just a small, dark object she quickly slid under the front of her jacket. Where was her car, really? I hadn't seen a single breakdown, not even a glint of metal, for at least 20 miles. And if she'd been walking for hours, why were her expensive tennis shoes barely dusty? I shifted gears and lumbered back onto the road, the silence in the cab immediately thick and wrong. "Rough spot to get stranded," I tried, trying to break the ice and settle my own nerves. "Tell me about it," she replied, but she didn't elaborate. She was staring straight ahead, her profile sharp and unmoving. That's when the CB radio, which I usually leave on to cut through the loneliness, crackled. It wasn't static. It was a sound like wind whistling through an empty canyon, followed by a faint, distorted snippet of an old blues song, the kind you'd hear on a beat-up vinyl record. I haven't heard a station out here in years. I reached to turn it off, but before I could, Sarah put a hand on my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Leave it." I pulled my arm away, suddenly feeling the need for space. I turned the heater up, but the air around her seat felt like a meat locker. I started noticing the small things that pushed the situation from hitchhiker to threat. Her jacket, where it brushed against the seatbelt, had a tiny smear of color on it. Not dirt, but a faint red smudge of dried paint. I looked in my side mirror. My old trailer has mismatched side marker lights, some new clear ones, some old faded ones, and one on the front corner that I know for a fact is cracked and leaking deep, thick, fatting red paint. Did she brush against my trailer before I stopped? My heart started thumping against my ribs. I glanced at her foot, pretending to check the pedal. Near the worn edge of the floor mat, half hidden by shadow, was a tiny brass object, round, distinctive, a spent shell casing for a high-caliber round. It wasn't a hitchhiker I picked up. It was a hunter, but why me? Why my rig? I kept my eyes on the road, watching the blackness for the telltale flicker of phantom headlights. I saw them, a pair of dim, close-set lights closing fast on the tail of my trailer. I hit the gas, pushing past the Kenworth's comfort zone, but the lights stayed right there. Then, just as I checked the mirror again, they vanished, like they were never there. I took a deep breath. You know, Sarah, the boneyard's got a reputation. They say if you stop here, you either leave with a ghost or you become one. She didn't react to the lights or the name. She finally turned to look at me, and that calm look was now flat, cold, and assessing. I know the reputation, Ben, she said, her voice losing its soft edge. But I didn't stop. I was waiting. My hand went to the door lock and slammed it down. Click. I think you need to tell me what you're really doing out here, I said, trying to keep the tremble out of my voice. And what that is you slid under your jacket. She smiled, a tiny, humorless curl of the lip. She reached into her jacket and pulled out the object. It was a small, high-quality semi-automatic pistol fitted with a sleek black silencer. The sight of it was a physical blow. It looked expensive, professional. I'll save us both the trouble, she said, pointing the gun not at me but at the digital screen where the truck's manifest was stored. I need the manifest for this shipment. Then I need you to pull over, ditch the truck, and walk away. Don't worry, this isn't personal. Right, I managed, my throat dry. A gun to my head and it's not personal. Who sent you? That's need to know, and you don't need to know anything but this. Your old partner, Rick, stole something valuable from my employer. We thought he was driving this rig tonight. You're just a scheduling inconvenience. Now, the manifest. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white, so that was it. Rick, the bastard, had set me up even after he left. This wasn't a ghost story. It was a simple, brutal crime. But why did the phantom lights disappear? I opened my mouth to stall, but before a word came out, the truck died. All the dash lights, the speedo, the oil pressure, everything snapped off. We went from 65 to a rapidly slowing, heavy missile in total darkness, save for the weak, dying glow of my headlights. What did you do? I yelled, twisting the key. Nothing. I didn't touch anything. Sarah's voice was suddenly tight, losing its professional calm. I looked out the window. The boneyard had arrived. A fog had rolled in, thick and suffocating, not white but a dirty, yellow-tinged gray. It swallowed the distant stars and pressed against the windshield. And then I heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the modern world. A horn, not the polite, high-pitched air horn of my Kenworth. This was a single, deep, dread-soaked blast, like a sound ripped from the earth itself. In the center of the road, framed by the dying headlights, a shape began to resolve in the swirling fog. It was a truck, but wrong. Too tall, too square, its chrome oxidized into a dull gray, its profile that of a monstrous, flat-nosed semi-truck from the 1950s. There were no side lights, only the vague, burning orange of its engine bay visible through the hood vents. It wasn't moving fast, but it was relentless. And it was silent except for that soul-shattering, ancient horn that blasted again, making the windows rattle. Sarah screamed. It wasn't the scream of a professional killer, but of a terrified child. Her composure shattered completely. She dropped the pistol into her lap and clawed at the window. "What is that? What is that thing?" she shrieked. I twisted the key again. The engine caught, sputtering, then roaring to life. The dash lights flickered back on. "That," I gasped, throwing the gear shifter into the lowest gear and revving the engine, "is the boneyard claiming its due." I didn't hesitate. I reached over, grabbed the barrel of the pistol she dropped, and yanked it out of the seat. She lunged for it, but I was faster. I hit the door lock and then the handle, throwing the passenger door open just as the rig lurched forward. "The manifest is yours," I screamed, tossing the gun, the keys to my truck, and a handful of change toward the ground, right into the path of the oncoming ancient phantom. "But you'll have to take it from him." I put my foot down, the truck screaming out of first gear. "Sarah, caught halfway between fighting me and looking at the horror bearing down on us, was pitched out onto the shoulder. I saw her land hard, scrambling away from the keys I'd thrown, scrambling away from the light. I didn't look in my mirror. I kept the throttle buried, punching through the fog bank that seemed to dissolve the moment I passed through it. The CB radio crackled one last time, that horrible blues song briefly returning, and then it was silent. I drove for 10 miles without slowing down. When I finally pulled over to catch my breath, the highway was normal. Stars were out. The air was dry and cold. I checked the passenger side. The door was closed. The seat was empty. On the floor mat next to where the shell casing had been was a damp brown smear of something that looked like desert clay, not blood, but something sticky and final. I got my delivery to Salt Lake City on time. The business is saved. But every time I drive a dark, lonely road now, I look for that faded red paint, and I listen for a horn that sounds like the final judgment. Did the highway protect me? Or did it just decide that a stolen cargo manifest wasn't worth interrupting its hunt for a higher toll? I'll never know, but I'll never stop again, not for anyone. The gas station attendant was a scarecrow of a man, all elbows and whispers, and I should have known better than to trust him. "You'll want to take the old bypass, Leo," he'd rasped, his eyes twitching toward a map that didn't show any bypass at all. "Saves you 2 hours. Nobody uses it anymore, but it's fast." Now 3 hours past that encounter, fast was a sick joke. I'm Leo, a man who lives and dies by the GPS and the schedule, a traveling salesman. My company sedan, a pristine silver vehicle, was supposed to be eating up the miles, but I hadn't seen a landmark in what felt like a lifetime. The highway was pristine, too perfect. Smooth, black asphalt, new guardrails. It felt less like a road and more like a set piece, a stage built just for me. I glanced at the dash. My phone, plugged into the charger, was completely dead, showing no signal in stark white text. The GPS screen was worse. A blank white canvas with a single blue arrow, me stuck in the center. I was driving on nothing. And the sun. That's what started the chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It had been sitting on the western horizon, a huge, bruised orange orb for what felt like an eternity. It was late afternoon light, but the clock read 7:45 p.m. I started talking to myself, a nervous habit. "Okay, Leo, just keep going. It has to connect somewhere. It has to." I checked my rearview mirror. Nothing. The road behind me was as empty as the road ahead. I was driving through an impenetrable forest of identical pine trees, thick and silent. Then I saw it. I'd set my coffee mug, half empty, lukewarm, in the cup holder maybe an hour ago. Now it was full, steaming. It smelled exactly like the Black Sumatra blend I'd bought this morning. I hadn't stopped. I hadn't touched it. My heart started to hammer. How long had I been driving, really? Who or what refilled the cup? I slammed my foot onto the brake, sending the steaming coffee sloshing over the brim. I pulled the sedan sharply onto the shoulder and killed the engine. Silence rushed in, heavy and absolute. No insects, no wind, no distant traffic. I checked the odometer. It was what finally broke my composure. It read 43,101.4 miles. I checked the trip odometer. It read 0 miles. The number hadn't moved since I'd entered this bypass. I had been driving at highway speeds, watching the road zip by, and I hadn't covered an inch. I got out of the car, my legs shaky. The asphalt felt strangely spongy under my dress shoes. I walked 10 feet, turned, and looked back at my car. My tire tracks, the only sign I'd been here, vanished about a car length behind the vehicle. The road was erasing me. Back inside, I fumbled with the radio, needing noise, needing reality. The static cut out, replaced by a single familiar voice. And what you need to remember is that success isn't about closing the deal, it's about accepting failure. Accepting that sometimes the best you can do It was a recording of me, a cheesy, motivational speech I gave at a company retreat 3 years ago. The recording stopped mid-word, mid-breath, and a low, sustained hum replaced it. Panic was clawing its way up my throat. I was trapped in a sensory deprivation chamber designed to look like a highway. I looked down, searching for any connection to reality. That's when I noticed the sweater. It was draped over the back seat. Not my current coat, but the heavy, gray, moth-eaten pullover I wore on October 14th, 2018. The day my daughter Sarah died. I hadn't seen that sweater in years. I'd burned it. I swore I had. The radio hum intensified, becoming a low, vibrating thrum that seemed to come from the very metal of the car. I pressed my hands to my ears. The car felt different. I ran my hands over the dashboard. It was scuffed, the cup holders sticky. It wasn't the company sedan anymore. It was the old, beloved, beat-up family station wagon. It smelled faintly of old French fries and her lavender-scented fabric softener. I was hallucinating. I had to be. The highway wasn't just physical, it was psychic. It had found the deepest wound and driven me straight back to it. I couldn't breathe. I was back in the car. I turned my head slowly toward the passenger seat, my heart slamming a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs. The seat wasn't empty. She was there, not a ghostly apparition, but the memory made flesh. Sarah, 8 years old. She was pale, her seatbelt tight across her small chest, looking at me with huge, dark eyes. "Daddy," she whispered, and the sound was like glass breaking. "We're going so fast, why won't you slow down?" I froze, tears streaming down my face. "Sarah, no, you're not real. I didn't stop. I couldn't." "You could have," the memory figure said, her voice completely without emotion, which was the most terrifying part. "You always drive too fast, Daddy." I slammed the brakes. The pedal went all the way to the floor with a terrible, grinding sound. The car didn't slow down. We were still flying at 65 mph. "The brakes don't work here, Leo," she said, her head tilted slightly. "Nothing stops." I realized the horror. This highway wasn't haunted by a dead spirit. It was a vortex of unending regret. It had captured me and was forcing me to reenact the last moments of my trauma, endlessly, until I surrendered to the loop and became another permanent, silently screaming fixture on the shoulder. If I accepted the lie, I'd be lost. Then the water started. It wasn't raining outside. It was bubbling up from the floor mats, a clear, ice-cold stream that quickly rose around my ankles. I was drowning, but not in rain, in the overwhelming, crushing realization of my failure and grief. The water was rising fast, soaking the old floor mats of the station wagon, bringing with it the faint, pungent smell of the stagnant pond where the wreck had happened. The memory Sarah began to scream, her small hands beating on the water as it reached her seat. "I can't swim, Daddy. Make it stop. You should have stopped." I had to find something real, a flaw, a tether. I looked wildly around the car, searching for any break in the illusion. My eyes landed on the driver's side window. Years ago, I'd caught a stone chip that left a tiny, star-shaped stress fracture in the glass. It was real. It was concrete. I scrambled into the back seat, fumbling under the faded upholstery. Hopping the tire iron from the real sedan had transferred into this nightmare car. My hands closed around cold metal. I looked at the screaming figure of my daughter, my heart breaking for the millionth time. "I couldn't stop then," I yelled, choking on the rising water which was now up to my chest. "But I won't stop now." I focused on the starburst chip on the window, the only real thing in this psychological hell. I brought the tire iron down with all my strength. The windshield didn't shatter into glass. It exploded into a brilliant, blinding shower of digital static. The screaming stopped. The water vanished instantly, leaving the air dry and cold. The old station wagon was gone, replaced by the cool, leather interior of my company sedan. The radio was back to static. The sun was setting normally, fading quickly into twilight. and right ahead, blazing with glorious mundane yellow light, was an exit ramp. I took the ramp, barely able to keep the car steady, and pulled into the first brightly lit truck stop. I sat there, shaking, breathing in the smell of diesel and stale coffee, the smell of reality. I looked in the rearview mirror. My own face was staring back, pale and raw. I looked at the back window. In the center, there was a clean, perfect, star-shaped hole in the glass, the size of a quarter. No spidering cracks, just a hole. I escaped, but I had to punch a hole right through the heart of my trauma to do it. I got out and locked the door. I'll sell the sedan tomorrow. Was the bypass a shortcut or a psychic trap? And why did it keep the exact piece of reality I used to break free? I didn't care. I was back in the real world and I was never taking a shortcut again. I knew I was pushing it when I ducked under the road-closed barricade. I'm Jamie, a photojournalist, and my current obsession is abandoned American industry. This particular stretch of State Highway 17, deep in the old copper barrens, was supposed to cut right through the ruins of a 1920s mining operation. It was a perfect, decaying subject for my portfolio. The highway was barely paved anymore, a crumbling mess overgrown with tenacious weeds. The sun was getting low, turning the sky a nasty, bruised purple. I should have turned back, but the thrill was too strong. Then disaster. I hit a pothole, not a hole, but a small crater, and the whole SUV lurched. The noise was sickening, a metallic crunch followed by the flat, final sound of a blown-out tire. I slammed the brakes and pulled onto the shoulder. I was stranded. No houses, no distant power lines, just the endless, choked forest on either side. My phone battery was predictably dead. I got out and immediately felt the isolation. The air here was heavy, smelling strongly of old pennies and damp earth, the metallic tang of copper oxide. I opened the back hatch and fumbled for the jack. It wasn't there. My ex, the mechanic, must have taken it. I was miles from anywhere, the darkness creeping in, and I had no tools. Panic started to prickle my skin. I decided my only option was to walk until I hit a signal or a landmark. I grabbed my camera bag, my one priority, and started heading back the way I came, trying to convince myself I'd be okay. That's when I started noticing the road itself. The trees, mostly thin, sickly-looking birches and pines, were odd. They were unnaturally straight, and every single low branch, up to maybe 10 feet high, had been snipped or sawed off. It looked like the world's most aggressive, precise pruning. What force was keeping the woods so meticulously clear along this abandoned route? Then I saw the guardrail. Every 50 feet or so, there was a patch of deep rust, and drilled into the metal were 3 small, clean holes, perfectly aligned vertically. I stopped and knelt down, running my finger over the cold, rough steel. They weren't bullet holes. They were too uniform, too deliberate. My fear shifted from the mundane danger of being stranded to something primal and unknown. As the last sliver of the sun vanished, the air became so cold I could see my breath, and then I heard it. It was a sound, faint and far away, coming from down the road I'd come from. A low, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. It was steady, heavy, yet somehow soft, like something immense was walking barefoot on the rough asphalt. It was too regular to be an animal, too organic to be machinery. I crouched low, trying to see through the gloom. The thumping grew closer, each sound resonating in my chest. It was definitely bipedal. I crept forward, using the crumbling concrete barriers as cover. The sound was deafening now, just a few hundred yards away, the air vibrating with the pressure of its movement. I risked a peek around a rusted maintenance shed. In the faint, sickly light of the quarter moon, I saw it. It was impossibly tall. It easily cleared the tops of the SUVs I usually saw on the highway. Its body was gaunt and long-limbed, covered in what looked like layers of ancient, dried leather, stretched tight over a frame that was far too large for a human. It paused right where my SUV was sitting. It wasn't looking at the car. It was moving its massive head slowly, deliberately, as if sniffing the air. It seemed to be detecting the residual heat and scent of my vehicle. I saw its hands. They were enormous, hanging past its knees, ending in long, metallic-looking appendages, 3 of them on each hand, the same 3-pronged pattern I saw in the guardrail. The creature was marking its territory. The highway wasn't closed because of mining or weather. It was closed because it was this thing's hunting ground. The trees were cleared to give it a better view. The holes were where it braced itself. My survival instinct screamed, and I ran. I didn't run toward the sound, but away, back to the only shelter I had, my ruined SUV. The thumping immediately changed pace, becoming faster, closer. I heard a rough, dragging sound behind the rhythm, like something heavy was being pulled across the pavement. I sprinted the last 100 feet and scrambled inside the driver's side of the SUV, slamming the door and locking it. My hands shook so badly I could barely breathe. The light outside was fading fast, but I saw the shadow fall over my windshield. The thing was outside. It didn't waste time trying the handle. It simply leaned down, its face, a nightmare of exposed sinew and bone, its eyes sunken and milky white, filling my side window. I smelled it then, a sickening combination of wet earth, iron, and something burnt like old wiring. It placed its massive claws on the door frame, the metal groaning a high-pitched, agonizing scream. I watched in paralyzed horror as it slowly, inexorably began to peel the door away from the chassis like tearing open a can of soup. The survival terror was complete. This wasn't a ghost, it was a physical predator, and it was getting inside. I scrabbled under the seats looking for anything. A lug wrench, a knife, anything. My hand closed around the heavy, unfamiliar grip of something metallic. It was a flare gun, an old one, left over from a previous owner's emergency kit. 1 shell loaded. The door tore free with a violent, screeching rip. The thing's face was now right there, inches from mine, its ruined mouth open. I had no choice. I couldn't outrun it. I had to change the rules of the hunt. I aimed the flare gun not at the creature, but past it, through the hole where the door had been and into the dense, high underbrush lining the road. I pulled the trigger. The flare exploded into the woods with a deafening crack and a blinding column of chemical smoke and magnesium flame. The creature stopped. It didn't flinch from the light or the sound. It reacted to the smell. That overpowering industrial stench, sulfur, phosphorus, the sharp, unnatural smell of a flare, seemed to confuse and repel it. It let out a horrifying, wet, gargling screech and turned its massive body away from me, lumbering toward the source of the overwhelming, unfamiliar scent. It wanted the subtle, quiet scent of fear and metal. The raw, violent smell of chemistry was a pollutant to its hunt. I scrambled out the passenger side, gasping for air. I didn't grab the keys or my wallet, only my camera bag. I ran, my lungs burning, not down the center of the road, but staying tight to the forest line, keeping low. I ran for what felt like an hour, the rhythmic thumping fading slowly behind me, replaced by the faint sound of the burning brush and the distant, hideous cry of the thing. I kept running until I saw it, a tiny, normal glow on the horizon, a street lamp. I had reached a normal, functioning county road. I stumbled out onto the clean asphalt, collapsing, sobbing for air. I was alive. Later, sitting in the relative safety of a diner, I opened my camera bag. The camera had been turned on during the scramble. I clicked through the photos, and there, at the very end, was one accidental shot. It was dark, blurry, but perfectly captured the 3 deep, parallel slash marks on the interior of my torn-off door panel. It was proof. I had escaped the boneyard, but I knew the highway was still out there, waiting. What was it? A remnant of the mines, mutated by forgotten pollution or something older? And how long until the flare dies out and it goes back to its hunt? I will never go back, but I have the photograph. And the highway has the door. The worst part about the midnight run was the absolute silence. I was hauling refrigerated pharmaceuticals, and the air conditioning hum of the cooling unit was the loudest thing in the world. I'm Rick, a long-haul veteran, used to the dead hours of I-10 near the Arizona border, the notorious Mirage Mile, where the heat plays tricks on your eyes, even at 3 a.m. I hadn't seen another vehicle in 40 minutes. My bladder was protesting, so I pulled off at an old, unpaved rest area that was just a dirt turnout surrounded by rusted-out chain-link fencing. I killed the engine, and the silence descended, heavy and immediate. As I was locking up to step outside, I saw a flicker in my periphery. Standing maybe 50 feet from the front of my rig, under the weak, busted bulb of the rest area's single light pole, was a man. He was just standing there, dressed in a dark, ill-fitting suit holding a briefcase. He looked out of place, too formal, too rigid, like a misplaced wax figure. I tried to be polite. "Hey, you all right, need a ride?" He didn't move. He didn't even look at me. His head was tilted slightly to the side, facing the dark desert beyond the fence. What was he staring at? Feeling the immediate, cold dread that veterans of the long haul know well, I hurried back into my cab. I slammed the door, locked it, and fired up the engine. I wasn't sticking around. I pulled back onto the highway, floorboarding the rig. I looked in my side mirror. The man was gone. Good. Just a strange desert lunatic. I drove for maybe 20 minutes, the tension slowly draining from my shoulders. I reached for my thermos of coffee. That's when I heard the knock. Not a rattle, not a vibration, but a clear, distinct tap-tap-tap on the rear window of the cab. My heart shot into my throat. The only window back there looks directly into the dark, humming cargo unit. It's impossible for someone to be back there. I hadn't stopped. I was doing 70 miles per hour. Was I finally hallucinating from lack of sleep? I gripped the wheel, forcing myself to be rational. It was probably a loose bit of trim or a stone kicked up. Then the second set of taps. Tap, 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 tap. This time slightly louder and accompanied by a faint, high-pitched whine that seemed to cut through the truck's engine noise. I reached up and killed the cab lights. I was terrified to look in the rearview mirror, but I had to. I took a deep, shuddering breath and looked. Nothing, just the black glass reflecting the faint glow of the dash. I drove on, sweating, convinced I was losing it. I needed to get to a town, to bright lights and people. I heard the knock again, but this time it was different. It sounded internal. It sounded like it was coming from inside the cabin itself. I spun around in my seat, frantically scanning the sleeper berth and the passenger floor. Nothing. Then my eyes fell on the passenger seat. The man in the suit. He was sitting there, buckled in, his briefcase resting neatly in his lap. He hadn't opened the door. He hadn't broken the window. He was just there, perfectly still, facing forward, his posture impeccable. I screamed, a ragged, pathetic sound, and swerved the truck, correcting only barely before I hit the median. "Who are you?" I yelled, my voice cracking. He still didn't look at me. His face, visible in the faint green glow of the dash, was utterly devoid of expression. It wasn't a human face. It was too smooth, too blank, like a piece of polished ceramic. He reached up slowly, deliberately, and turned on the cab radio. It immediately blasted a horrible, grinding white noise, pure, raw static, so loud it was painful. "Turn that off," I roared, reaching for the dial. Before I could touch it, the static cut out. The radio screen was blank, and the man finally spoke. His voice wasn't a voice. It was a cacophony of low-frequency sound, a dry, mechanical rattle that vibrated the very steering wheel in my hands. It sounded like a dozen old, broken radios trying to tune in at once. "You took the long route," the static voice rasped. I felt a cold pressure on my chest. "The route? What route?" "The Mirage. It only ends when the cargo is delivered." He shifted slightly, and the sound of his movement was not fabric on leather, but the terrible grinding of gears, like rusty clockwork. I realized this wasn't a man. It was an entity of the highway, an amalgamation of noise, isolation, and electrical interference. The Mirage Mile wasn't heat and dust. It was this thing's hunting ground. My focus snapped to the briefcase. It wasn't leather. It was made of dull, metallic material, and it seemed to be breathing, the edges expanding and contracting slightly, in time with the low whine that was filling the cab. I knew he wasn't after me. He was after the cargo, the pharmaceuticals, the things I was paid to keep cold and safe. "This is my truck," I yelled, reaching for the steel thermos of coffee I still had clutched in my hand. He turned his head. This time I saw his eyes. They weren't eyes at all, but two deep, swirling voids of TV snow, pure, frantic white and black static. "It is our mile," the voice hissed. "The cargo belongs to the silence." He reached out a hand, and the moment his fingers, long, thin, and unnaturally segmented, brushed the temperature control panel, the red warning light for the cargo unit flashed on. Critical failure. I swung the thermos in a blind, desperate arc. I didn't hit his head. I hit the briefcase. The moment the steel thermos connected with the metallic shell, the briefcase let out a deafening, electrical screech. The truck immediately shuddered, all the lights flickering. The radio exploded back to life with that blinding, painful static. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, pushing the Kenworth past 80. I had to get off this mile. The entity recoiled, not in pain, but as if I had damaged the only thing that grounded it to this reality. It began to dissolve. Not quickly, but slowly, its figure pixelating, turning into swirling patterns of black and white noise. "You cannot stop the signal," the static voice whispered, now coming not from the man, but from the speaker grills in the dash. I didn't slow down. I was counting the mile markers, pushing toward the first sign of civilization. As the truck roared over a bridge, the one over the dry riverbed that everyone knew marked the end of the Mirage Mile, the seat beside me became empty. The radio went dead. The temperature warning light vanished. The air was breathable again. I pulled off at the first truck stop I saw, stumbling out into the blinding glare of the fluorescent lights. I checked the passenger seat. The seatbelt was still fastened. The seat cushion was indented, but there was no suit, no man, no briefcase. But on the seat, where his hand had been, was a faint, geometric burn mark. And when I turned on my truck's console, the radio station was permanently set to 99.9, pure static. I had delivered the cargo, but I knew the highway had tried to collect its toll. What was that cargo to him, and what would have happened if I hadn't hit that briefcase? I never touch that dial now. I drive in silence, always looking in my mirror, always listening for the sound of a single, slow knock. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the two-lane road into a slick black mirror. I was pushing the old Crown Vic 75, and every nerve in my body was screaming. My name is Marty, and I wasn't running from the police. Not yet. I was running from the inevitable. 2 hours ago, in a dusty gas station restroom 40 miles back, I'd left a man bleeding out on the cold tile floor. It wasn't clean. It wasn't supposed to be necessary. It was supposed to be a simple handoff of the $10,000 I owed him. But he got greedy, pulled a knife, and I reacted. Now I was a killer on the run. This road, old Route 93, cuts through the deep south swampland. Locals call it the Whisper Track because the thick fog and dense cypress trees always seem to be talking when you drive it alone. Tonight, though, the rain was too loud for whispers. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. No flashing lights, no headlights, nothing but the endless, empty highway stretching back into the storm. Was I really free? I reached over, fumbling under the passenger seat, and pulled out the gym bag. It wasn't the 10 grand I was supposed to pay. It was $50,000, the money I'd actually stolen from him days before. The reason he'd cornered me tonight. The bag smelled faintly of mildew and fear. I had just managed to jam the bag back under the seat when the radio, which had been off, suddenly hissed to life. It wasn't static. It was the sound of a phone ringing. An old-fashioned rotary phone ring right from the car speakers. I stared at the dash. My phone was in my pocket, silent. The radio display was blank. I reached out and hit the power button. The ringing didn't stop. It just kept going, a maddening, persistent brrring that seemed to be vibrating the floorboards. Finally driven mad, I screamed, "Answer the damn thing." The ringing stopped instantly, replaced by a dial tone, then a click and a voice. It was deep, calm, and utterly devoid of accent or inflection. "Yes, operator," the voice said from the speakers. I choked on my own breath. "Who is this? How are you doing this?" "I am simply completing the connection, Marty," the voice replied. "The road, you see, demands to know where the journey ends." I slammed the brakes, skidding the car halfway into the muddy shoulder. The Crown Vic shuddered to a halt. The radio was silent again. I forced myself to breathe. A hallucination, exhaustion, guilt. It had to be. I started driving again, slowly, headlights cutting through the torrent. But then I noticed the mud. When I'd skidded, my tires had thrown mud onto the driver's side of the car. Now, as I drove, I looked in the side mirror and saw something impossible. The mud wasn't being washed away by the heavy rain. In fact, it was spreading, slowly creeping up the body panel, thicker and darker than any earth. It looked like a vein of black, oily tar. I sped up, frantically trying to outrun whatever was happening to the car. I saw the mud creep across the back window, obscuring my view. Then through the speakers, the voice returned. This time it was slightly muffled, like it was speaking through fabric. "Don't worry about the dirt, Marty. It washes off. The stain underneath, however, that's permanent." "What do you want?" I whispered, tears mixing with the sweat on my face. "I want the fare. Every road has a toll. On this highway, the toll is paid in consequence." I hit the gas, pushing 80-90. The car began to feel sluggish, heavy. I could hear a new sound now, a low, sucking, wet sound coming from the undercarriage. I glanced at the dashboard. The speedometer was dropping rapidly, even though my foot was glued to the floor. 70, 60, 50. "You're not going fast enough, Marty," the voice sighed, its tone almost disappointed. "Your guilt is weighing down the chassis. It's slowing you down." I started to see shapes in the road ahead. They weren't cars or trees. They were flickering shadows standing just off the shoulder, watching. They looked vaguely like people, but their outlines shifted and shimmered in the rain, like bad TV reception. I realized with sick horror that they were the specters of the people the whisper track had claimed. The victims, the desperate, the guilty. And they were all focused on me. I looked at the passenger seat. The gym bag was sitting there now, pulled out from under the seat, zipped open. The stacks of cash inside were visible, but they weren't green. They were deep crimson, soaked and dripping a thick metallic liquid onto the seat. The money had become blood. The car was barely managing 35 miles per hour now. The mud was everywhere, coating the windows, crawling onto the steering wheel. The sucking sound was the worst, the feeling that the swamp itself was reaching up to anchor me. "The money won't buy you out of this mile, Marty," the voice said, sounding closer now, like it was sitting right behind me. "You stole the opportunity for atonement. You sealed the fate of another man." I glanced at the passenger side door. The seatbelt on that side was taut, pulled tight. I couldn't see anyone, but the belt was clearly holding something. I grabbed the briefcase stern blood bag and threw it with all my strength into the back seat. "Take it. Take the damn money." The car gave a massive, groaning shudder. The speedometer jumped back up to 60. The mud began to recede slightly, pulling back off the windshield. "The money is just paper, Marty," the voice replied, now sounding tired. "The weight is the act." Just then, my headlights cut through the rain and illuminated an incredible sight. A massive, rusted tow truck was parked sideways across the highway up ahead, its powerful engine idling. It was modern, it was real, and a figure, silhouetted in the headlights, was stepping out of the cab. Finally, salvation, I thought. I was going to wave him down, plead for a lift to the nearest police station. But as I approached, the figure moved into the light. It wasn't a tow truck driver. It was the man I had left bleeding in the gas station. He was soaked to the bone, but his clothes were clean. His face was pale, his eyes wide and vacant, and he held the knife I'd taken from him. He was standing there, blocking the road, not as a threat, but as an inescapable obstacle. The voice in the cab gave a final, mournful sigh. "You see, Marty, you can't outrun the reason you're running. This road only leads to final meetings." I had 2 seconds. I could hit the brakes and face the specter of the man I killed, or I could swerve off the road and into the swamp. I spun the wheel, plunging the Crown Vic into the deep, sucking mud of the cypress swampland. The car immediately became stuck, the engine dying with a pathetic cough. The water was black and cold, rushing in through the floorboards. I scrambled out of the driver's side and into the thick, thorny undergrowth. I didn't stop to look back. I just ran, leaving the car, the $50,000, and the haunting presence of the man and the voice behind me. I ran until I hit dry land and collapsed, shivering, miles from the whispered track. I'm a killer, running on foot now, but I'm alive. Was the man standing on the road his spirit, or the highway's ultimate illusion? And how long will it be until the whisper track finds a way to deliver the final consequence, even off its pavement? All I know is that the silence now is louder than any scream. I was driving a rental car, a bland white sedan, and I hated everything about it. I prefer my own beat-up truck, but I was on a tight, mandatory business trip, heading across the old state Route 41 near the Appalachians. It's called the Shadow Line because the steep, winding peaks block the sun for half the day. It was 4 a.m., still pitch black, and I was running on fumes and cheap gas station energy drinks. My name is Connor, and I am usually a very grounded, practical guy. What happened next convinced me that the universe, or at least this highway, had a personal vendetta against my sanity. I hadn't seen another car for ages. The only light was my high beams cutting a tunnel through the darkness. I adjusted my rearview mirror for the 10th time, trying to align the reflection of the car's interior with the sliver of road behind me. That's when I saw it. In the mirror's reflection in the back seat, the silhouette of a person was sitting up. I nearly swerved off the road. I slammed the brakes and the car skidded to a stop. I whipped my head around. The back seat was empty. "No," I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "No, no, no." I opened the door, grabbed my heavy flashlight, and checked the back doors locked. The trunk locked. The seats were covered in the standard rental car upholstery, clean, cold, and utterly empty. I sat back down, hyperventilating. It was sleep deprivation. It had to be. A shadow, a reflection of my own head, something. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to restart my drive. Then I looked in the rearview mirror again. The back seat was still empty, but the reflection of the road behind me was wrong. In the mirror, the road wasn't black asphalt and trees. It was a dusty, red clay track, flanked by sun-scorched scrub brush. And in that reflection, I saw the dust trail of a vehicle approaching fast. A heavy, boxy, old vehicle that looked like a 1970s ambulance. I snapped my head around to look through the actual rear window. Nothing, just the black, rainy night and the empty highway. My mind started spinning. Why was the mirror showing me a completely different place and time? Was the shadow line messing with my vision, or with the car? I started driving again, slowly. Every time I looked in the mirror, the scene was the same. The dusty, red track and the old ambulance was getting closer, its headlights dull yellow squares burning into the reflection. I tried smashing the mirror. I hit it with my fist, but it didn't break. It just felt cold and hard, and the reflection of the dusty road didn't even ripple. Then the static came. My phone started to buzz violently in the center console. I picked it up. The screen wasn't just showing no signal. It was cycling through an old-fashioned emergency broadcast test pattern, accompanied by a loud, insistent shhhhzzzzzzz from the phone speaker. The man in the suit I'd thought I saw earlier was a distraction. This was about the link, the connection the mirror provided. In the mirror, the ambulance was almost on top of me. I could see the driver now, a blurred, hulking figure with no clear features. "This isn't real," I muttered, but my foot was already slamming the accelerator. I pushed the rental car to 80, desperate to outrun a vehicle that only existed inches from my face in a piece of glass. As I sped up, the reflection of the ambulance sped up too. It was matching my speed perfectly. It was a pursuit I couldn't escape. Then the terrible realization hit me. If the mirror was showing a different reality, what was happening in my reality out of sight? I looked down at the center console. The radio screen had turned black, and a single word had been keyed in, white and blocky: pull. I looked in the mirror. The ambulance driver had extended one long, blurred hand toward the reflective glass. It was beckoning me. I looked back at the console. The word changed to "We're here." Suddenly, the floor of the passenger seat felt cold. I looked down. Lying on the carpet was a small, dusty, faded red key card, the kind you use to access a secure medical facility. It looked ancient. Where did it come from? The smell hit me then, faint but unmistakable, cutting through the stale air of the rental car. It smelled like burnt sugar and formaldehyde. I realized the ambulance wasn't chasing me to kill me. It was chasing the car itself. The car was a temporary vessel, and whatever the shadow line was, it was trying to reclaim the contents or the history of this vehicle. I yanked the emergency brake, purely out of irrational panic, and the car screamed and slid sideways. I jammed the gear shift into park. The moment the car stopped, the rearview mirror went dark. The reflection of the red, dusty road vanished. The ambulance was gone. But now, the back window, the actual back window, was no longer reflecting the empty highway. It was covered in handprints, not dusty ones, but oily, thick smears that were dragging down the glass, like someone was trying to smear the window shut from the outside. I grabbed the only weapon I had, the heavy, steel cup of my thermos. I unlatched the driver's door and threw myself out onto the shoulder, landing hard in the wet leaves. I kept the car between me and the back window. I could hear the faint, sickening sound of wet fabric scraping against the metal roof of the car. Something was up there, trying to get to the front seat. I ran around to the back of the car, heart pounding, and flung open the trunk. Empty, except there was a small, plastic evidence bag taped to the inside of the spare tire compartment. Inside the bag was a blood-soaked piece of bandage, dried stiff with age. I slammed the trunk shut and dove back into the driver's seat. I didn't care about the key card or the ambulance anymore. This car was a moving tomb. I started the engine and slammed the accelerator. As I peeled out, I risked a glance in the rearview mirror. The reflection was normal now, showing the empty, rainy highway. But on the front windshield, just above the dash, a single finger smudge of that oily, dark handprint was forming. It looked like it was writing something. I drove the rest of the trip with the mirror flipped up and my eyes glued to the highway ahead, refusing to look at the windshield smudge. I dropped the rental car at the airport with the key card and the evidence bag still inside the trunk, and I didn't say a word to the attendant. I took the first flight home and tried to forget the shadow line. But every time I checked my reflection in a piece of glass, I wonder, did I escape the highway, or did I simply leave the evidence of its true passenger in the trunk for the next poor soul? And what would have happened if the thing on the roof had finished writing its message? My name is Finn, and I was supposed to be halfway across Nevada by now. Instead, I was trapped in a loop of asphalt and dread on the loneliest road in America, Route 50, the loneliest road. Only this wasn't the loneliness of distance, it was the isolation of repetition. It was 1 a.m. when I first saw the sign for mile marker 88. I remember feeling a burst of relief. I had been driving for hours, hauling a light trailer of antique furniture for a client, fighting a heavy, oppressive fog that had rolled in just after sundown. Seeing a clear mile marker, a fixed point in the rolling gray, was a comfort. I pulled over for a quick minute to stretch my legs and check the tie-downs. The air was dead still, the silence profound. When I got back in my old pickup, cranked the engine and pulled back onto the road, the fog was even thicker. I drove for maybe 10 minutes, pushing through the opaque vapor, and then I saw it again. Mile marker 88. My stomach dropped. I checked the dash clock. Only 10 minutes had passed. I hadn't slowed down. There were no exits, no turnoffs, and no way I could have doubled back in this soup without realizing it. The number was exactly the same. The sign itself looked identical, maybe even slightly cleaner than I remembered. "Okay, Finn," I muttered, trying to stay calm. "It's a glitch, bad reading, move on." I drove faster this time, white-knuckling the wheel. I passed the mile marker, watched it disappear in my side mirror, and counted to 600 in my head, enough time to cover at least 10 miles at 70 miles per hour. I looked up. Mile marker 88. My hand started shaking violently. I slammed the brakes and pulled onto the shoulder again, the tires spitting gravel that vanished instantly into the fog. The air felt colder now, and the silence was no longer profound. It was hostile. I got out. This time I walked up to the sign. It was solid, painted aluminum, bolted firmly to a concrete post. I pulled out my phone, still dead. I took a deep breath, fighting the rising panic. If I was trapped in a time or space loop, how did I get into it, and what were the rules? I decided to leave a marker. I found a sharp rock and scraped a deep, ugly gouge into the pole near the base. Finn was here, 2 a.m. I got back in, locked the doors, and kept driving. I didn't accelerate this time. I crawled forward at 30 miles per hour, watching my odometer with obsessive focus. It was rolling up. 0.1 miles, 0.2 miles, 0.3 miles. I kept this slow pace for nearly 20 minutes, praying for any landmark, any change in the fog, or any sign of another car. Then the odometer locked up. It froze at 7.4 miles. And up ahead, emerging from the gray, mile marker 88. But this time it was different. The post was gouged near the base. The scratch I had just made was there, but beneath it there were other gouges, deeper and older, carved with the same frantic energy. I could just make out faint, faded letters beneath the grime. LW stuck. JB came back. I wasn't the first one in this trap, and the pole hadn't been moved. I was being reset. I drove past the marker, my mind screaming. The sound of the engine suddenly felt distant, muffled, like I was underwater. I realized what the highway was doing. It was consuming my forward progress. It was using my energy, my time, and my sanity to feed a perpetual, fixed moment. I slowed down and pulled over again. I had to think. If the loop was spatial, a bizarre, endless loop of road, then the objects should be the same. But the sign was accumulating history. Could the highway be holding onto the previous victims' attempts to mark time? I glanced in my side mirror. The fog was retreating from the road, but instead of the clear black of the highway, the space behind me was filled with a swirling, brownish smudge, like static electricity mixed with dust. And within that smudge I saw faint headlights. Not car headlights, too dim, too yellow, but the kind of weak, battery-powered lamps people carry. A slow, creeping terror went through me. I reached into my glove box, pulled out the heavy wrench I kept there and gripped it tight. The headlights in the smudge were getting closer. I had to break the loop before whatever was out there reached me. I checked my cab. The trailer was the weak point. I was carrying valuable antiques, but more importantly, the heavy, wooden box that contained a 19th century grandfather clock. It was secured by chains and a heavy metal bar. I had a terrible idea. If the road was the fixed point, maybe the vehicle had to change. I forced myself out into the icy air. The fog had thinned enough that I could see about 20 yards, but the visibility was dropping again fast. I hurried to the back of the trailer, my wrench ready. I unlatched the heavy, rattling back door. The inside of the trailer was dark and filled with the stale smell of old wood and dust. The furniture, the armoire, the chest of drawers, the grandfather clock, was all there, everything exactly as I'd loaded it. But then I saw a smudge of color on the floor near the clock crate. It wasn't wood stain. It was a damp, dark stain that looked horribly like dried blood. I looked up at the ceiling of the trailer. Scratched deep into the metal in frantic, desperate lines were tally marks, dozens of them, and next to them, written in a cramped, shaky hand, 88 is forever. I wasn't just stuck in a loop. I was now occupying a space that had been previously occupied by someone else, a former victim of mile marker 88, and that history had been transferred to my trailer. The shhh of the approaching smudge was getting louder. I could hear a faint, wet scraping sound within it, like dozens of dried hands dragging across the pavement. I had to be quick. I threw the wrench at the heavy chain securing the grandfather clock crate. It bounced off with a loud clang. Then the lights in the smudge behind the trailer flared, suddenly bright and yellow, and I heard a noise that chilled me to the bone, a faint, echoing scream that sounded like it was coming from deep inside the fog, a sound of absolute, final despair. I realized the highway wasn't just recycling time. It was recycling the deaths of those who tried to escape. And the creature in the fog was the mechanism of that recycling. Driven by pure terror, I grabbed the heavy metal bar that locked the trailer door and swung it with all my strength at the wooden crate holding the clock. Wood splintered. I swung again and again until the side of the crate collapsed. I grabbed the delicate, antique grandfather clock, a beautiful, fragile mechanism, and threw it out onto the shoulder of the road. It shattered on the asphalt with a sickening, resounding crash of wood and brass gears. I jumped back into the cab, slammed the door, and locked it. I threw the truck into drive, peeling out onto the highway, not caring about the speed. I was driving toward mile marker 88. As I approached the sign, the fog in my rearview mirror finally resolved into a distinct, horrifying shape. It was a mass of gaunt, translucent figures, maybe 4 or 5 of them, moving with that awful scraping sound. They were moving incredibly fast, drawn by the sound of the crash. The moment my headlights hit mile marker 88, the truck let out a massive electrical thump. All the lights went out. The engine died. I was coasting, in total silence, right next to the sign. I could hear the scraping figures closing in from behind. I gripped the wheel, waiting for the end. I was one of them now. But then the truck lurched. The engine caught. It roared back to life, all the lights flashing on in a chaotic burst of power. I pushed the gas pedal to the floor. The truck screamed past the sign. I looked in the mirror. The massive mass of scraping figures had stopped. They were milling around the side of the road, drawn to the site of the shattered grandfather clock, their translucent forms bending over the broken wood and brass. The road ahead was no longer thick with fog. It was clear. I was moving and I was counting. 89, 90, 91. I drove until the sun finally broke the horizon, painting the desert a sickly, glorious orange. I drove until I hit a town and pulled into the first diner I saw. I stumbled out of the truck, legs shaking. I had a story to tell, but no one would believe it. I opened the trailer door again, cautiously. The tally marks and the dark stain were gone. The trailer was spotless. But when I checked the glove box, the heavy wrench I'd thrown was gone. And taped to my steering wheel was a small, delicate brass gear, the size of a quarter, cold to the touch. It was from the clock. The highway had demanded a sacrifice to break the loop. The clock, the antique, the symbol of measured, predictable time. I traded my past time for my future. I threw the gear into the dirt and walked away, never looking back at the truck. I never filed a claim for the clock. I just kept driving. Did the sacrifice of the clock truly break the loop? Or did the highway simply swap out the item I lost for the fear I gained? And is the mile marker 88 I passed now waiting for the next tired soul to join Finn, LW, and JB? The silence on the open road now feels like a countdown. I was driving a stolen van full of panic. My name is Clay. I'm not a professional criminal, I'm a grunt who made one big mistake. I took a job stealing a specific item, a small, heavy wooden box from a well-guarded warehouse. The item wasn't jewelry or cash, it was something worse. I was now on the Devil's Spine, Highway 19 in the remote Northeast, famous for its sharp curves, steep cliffs, and the dense, unbroken forest that eats all cell service and radio signals. It was 11:45 p.m. The box was riding shotgun. It was roughly the size of a shoebox, made of dark, heavy wood bound by tarnished copper straps. It didn't look like much, but it felt like it was filled with lead. Every time the van hit a bump, the box would thump against the seatbelt, a dead, resonant sound that vibrated right through the floor. I was already on edge from the heist, but the road was making it worse. The van, an old beater I'd boosted, kept trying to pull sharply to the left, hugging the shoulder. It wasn't the alignment. It felt like a heavy, invisible hand was gripping the wheel, guiding me toward the steep drop-off. I fought it, gritting my teeth. Was the highway punishing me for the crime, or was it the box causing the pull? I reached over and pushed the box closer to the center console, trying to secure it. As my hand brushed the wood, I felt a distinct, faint vibration, not from the road, but from within the box itself, like a quiet, anxious heartbeat. Suddenly, the whole van filled with a high-pitched, insistent ringing. Not a phone, not the engine, but a sound that felt like it was being generated directly inside my ear canal. I slammed my hands over my head, screeching to a stop on the shoulder. I killed the engine. Silence rushed in, complete and absolute. The ringing was gone. I looked down at the box. It was absolutely still. I started the engine again. The ringing returned instantly. I realized the sound wasn't meant to scare me. It was meant to locate me. Someone or something was tracking the box, and the sound was my proximity alert. I looked in my side mirror. Nothing. But the fog, which had been patchy, was now gathering rapidly, thick and greasy, clinging to the asphalt. I drove on, forced to endure the mind-shattering ringing. I pushed the van to 60, desperate to get to the nearest populated area. Then I felt the weight shift. The pull to the left suddenly vanished. Instead, I felt a heavy, crushing pressure bearing down on the van's roof. The shocks immediately bottomed out and the whole vehicle creaked in protest, like I was carrying a ton of stone. The van slowed from 60 to 40, despite my foot mashing the gas pedal. I looked up. The ceiling fabric was sagging slightly, the metal groaning. There was something on the roof, something impossibly heavy. The ringing stopped. The silence was worse. I slammed the brakes and threw the van into a violent skid, hopping to shake off whatever was up there. When I stopped, I grabbed my crowbar from under the seat, flung open the driver's door, and sprinted around to the passenger side. I looked at the roof. Nothing. The surface was wet with condensation but perfectly clear. No dents, no scratches, no sign that anything had been there. But the van was still riding low, and the metallic groaning continued. I looked inside. The box was sitting exactly where I left it. I understood then. The entity chasing the box wasn't physical. It was a force of gravitational consequence, using the highway as its conduit. It was adding the weight of the crime, the weight of the theft, directly to my vehicle. I needed to ditch the box, but I couldn't just throw it out. The instructions were specific. If I was pursued, I had to ensure the box could not be recovered by anyone else. I forced the van back onto the road and drove it to the nearest high point, a bridge that crossed a deep, rocky ravine. The van struggled, groaning up the incline. As I reached the midpoint of the bridge, the gravitational pressure intensified. The van was now crawling at 10 miles per hour, the tires screaming against the asphalt as the weight tried to flatten them. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely steer. Then I heard a sound from the box, a faint, low whimpering like a distressed animal. The wood of the box began to glow faintly with a dull, pulsing red light that lit up the interior of the cab. "You're not taking me," I choked out, grabbing the crowbar. I stopped the van right in the middle of the bridge. The fog here was so thick it was like driving through milk. I unbuckled the seatbelt holding the box, grabbed it and pulled. It felt like I was trying to lift a cinder block. I wrestled it to the door, opened the passenger side, and threw my entire body weight into pushing the box out. It hit the guardrail with a deafening crack and tumbled over the edge, dropping into the abyss of the ravine. The moment the box left the car, the pressure vanished. The van springs popped back up. The metallic groaning stopped instantly. The silence was absolute. I stood on the bridge, shivering, looking over the guardrail into the white abyss. The ringing was gone. The red glow was gone. I was safe. I jumped back into the van, threw it in reverse, and backed off the bridge, not wanting to spend another second over that ravine. I drove fast, the relief a physical rush. I made it 5 miles, the highway now clear and empty. I was breathing easier. Then I looked in the side mirror. The fog behind me was gone, but in the distance, slowly lumbering over the bridge, I saw headlights. 2 of them, moving incredibly slow. They weren't the yellow squares of an old car. They were 2 small, dull red circles, moving with a terrible, mechanical clank-clank-clank that echoed faintly off the cliffs. And sitting right in the center of my rearview mirror, sitting on my back dash, was the small, dark, heavy wooden box. It was pristine, unharmed. It hadn't fallen into the ravine. It had teleported itself back onto the van the moment the gravitational pressure was released. The box was not an object of the crime. It was the executioner. I knew I couldn't run. The entity was relentless and the box was the anchor. I drove on, the small red light of the box pulsing on the dash. I drove until the van ran out of gas, just as the sun began to rise. I walked away from the van, leaving the box on the back dash, knowing that the devil's spine would claim the vehicle, the box, and the crime forever. I'm walking now, free of the highway, but I know the box is still out there, waiting for the next thief, waiting to attach its weight to the next vehicle that crosses its path. Did the box actually jump back onto the car, or did the highway simply reset my personal reality, showing me the object of my guilt was inescapable? And how long until the small red lights catch up to me on foot? I don't look back. I just keep walking. The smell was the first thing to break me. Not the smell of the cold mountain air or the pine trees, but a sickening, synthetic scent that followed me everywhere. It smelled like burnt insulation and cheap upholstery, the stench of the house I'd left behind, now a raging inferno on the evening news. My name is Leo, and I wasn't running from the police. I was running from the consequences. I was on State Route 13, the Cold Pass, a winding ribbon of highway draped over the Appalachians. I'd rigged the wiring in the attic, filed the insurance claim, and driven off, intending to collect a payout big enough to bury my massive debts and start fresh. My wife was supposed to be out of town. She wasn't. Now, as I drove the rented SUV faster than I should, pushing 80 on slick, unfamiliar roads. The guilt was a heavy passenger. I tossed my phone off an earlier bridge to kill the signal and the tracker. I needed silence and distance. But the cold pass offered neither. The mountain slopes were steep, the sheer drops dizzying, and the highway surface was treacherous, covered in patches of black ice that shimmered in my headlights. I kept glancing at my hands on the wheel. They were pale, huge, and felt alien to me. The hands of a man who just committed arson and possibly murder. I passed a single, weathered wooden sign, "Welcome to Cold Pass, mile 101. The second I crossed that line, the highway changed. The rough asphalt gave way to a section of unnaturally smooth, black pavement that seemed to absorb all sound. The SUV, which had been rattling, became eerily silent. Then the heat hit me. I checked the vents. The heat was off, yet the cab was suddenly oppressive, thick, and humid. I cracked a window, letting the icy air rush in, but it didn't help. The air inside smelled precisely like the inside of a burning home, that heavy, sickly sweet aroma of melting plastic and old dust. My anxiety surged. I slammed my fist on the steering wheel. Focus, Leo, alibi, state line, focus. I noticed the digital clock on the dash. It wasn't moving. It jumped suddenly from 7:55 p.m. to 7:52 p.m., then lurched forward to 8:01 p.m. Then, with a flicker, it resettled, burning bright red with the exact time the fire had been deliberately set, 7:58 p.m. It stayed there, mocking me. I tried to tell myself I was exhausted, hallucinating. I needed to hear a normal voice. I needed to rationalize. I spoke out loud, my voice strained. It was an accident. The wiring was faulty. I didn't mean for it to go that far. The moment the words left my mouth, they were repeated. It wasn't an echo. The sound came from the speaker grills in the dash, a clear, metallic, booming distortion of my own voice. It was an accident. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I gripped the wheel, my breath catching. I looked wildly around the cab. Who is there? Silence. I whispered, testing the limits of the horror, my throat dry. I just needed the money. The reply was immediate, loud, and final. I just needed the money. The cold pass wasn't haunted by a ghost. It was a vortex of confession. It was weaponizing my own guilt, forcing me to listen to my crimes spoken aloud, validated by an invisible, judging presence. I stopped talking. I drove in absolute silence, the air thick with the metallic stench. But the highway wouldn't tolerate my silence. The steering wheel suddenly developed a firm, gentle resistance, pulling the car sharply to the right, steering me toward the edge of the road, the sheer drop of the mountain pass. I fought it, muscles straining against the unnatural, insistent force. Then the voice returned, but it wasn't mine. It was soft, familiar. It was the clear, pleading voice of my wife, Sarah, recorded from a message she'd left me last year during an argument. "Leo, why are you doing this? We can talk. Please, we can talk about this." The voice didn't come from the speakers. It seemed to come from the passenger seat, vibrating the leather. It was a projection of her memory, a constant reminder of the life I'd destroyed. I screamed, a pathetic, ragged sound trying to drown her out. She deserved it. She signed the papers. It was my plan, mine. The SUV fought me harder, the wheel trying to rip itself from my hands. The voice of my wife faded, replaced by the horrifyingly clear, amplified metallic echo of my last true confession. It was my plan, mine. The air suddenly went ice cold, even colder than the outside air. The dashboard clock flared again, showing the time of the fire, and then the smooth black asphalt ahead snapped. It was instantly replaced by a wide, shimmering patch of oily black ice that had appeared out of thin air. The SUV hit it at 60 miles per hour. I lost control completely. The car screamed, spinning violently toward the cliff edge. I braced myself for the final, dizzying plunge. As the car spun, I saw it in a flash of the taillights, a figure standing right on the white line, still and calm. It was tall, gaunt, draped in what looked like blackened, wet rags, and in its hand it held a single, small, bright flickering flame. It wasn't my wife. It was the specter of the fire itself, the consequence made visible. The SUV skidded to a stop, the passenger side tires hanging precariously over the 1,000-foot drop. The fire figure vanished, but the flame it held had transferred. The check engine light on my dash was now burning not yellow, but with a terrible, flickering orange fire. The heat inside the cab was overwhelming, scorching my lungs. The voice of the highway gave a final, deep, satisfied sigh. I didn't hesitate. I threw the door open, ignoring the burning heat coming from the dash, and dove out onto the road. I scrambled across the treacherous ice and threw myself down the pine-covered embankment, rolling until I was deep in the freezing, dark woods. I watched through the trees. The SUV sat there, idling, its entire interior glowing with that suffocating, horrible orange light. The confessional mile had its vehicle. I was freezing, injured, and utterly ruined. I was a fugitive, but I had escaped the immediate judgment of the highway. I started to run, plunging deeper into the cold, dark mountains, praying for a state line, a road, any place that hadn't heard my confession. Did the highway already send my confession to the authorities through some unseen signal? Was the fire specter simply a messenger, or the actual fire that took her life? All I know is that my crime is no longer a secret between me and the night. It is permanently etched into the silence of the cold pass, waiting for the next tired soul to drive by and repeat the terrible words.